Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the session on Jewish pro-life replies to Jewish pro-abortion claims. The reason I do it that way is in case you got in the wrong room. This is the room you want. Okay. So our speaker today, this afternoon, is Cecily Routman. She is the founder and president of the Jewish Pro-Life Foundation. She grew up, as most Jews, learning that abortion is an acceptable practice in Judaism. She questioned that premise in 2005 when she listened to a national public radio program in which a member of the National Council of Jewish Women declared her righteous right to a partial birth abortion. Seeing a need to educate her faith community and provide a Jewish pro-life voice in the public square, she started the Jewish Pro-Life Foundation in 2006. Ms. Routman.
Thank you. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And I want to thank the National Right to Life Committee for welcoming our workshop. It's just really kind of a pioneering experience to be here. I always feel like the new girl on the block when I'm around pro-life advocates that have been doing the work a really long time. I always feel like I'm pretty new to the movement. What I decided to do today was go through an outline of what I have to share today, and this is actually on our website. I put a tab at jewishprolifefoundation.org. I put a tab for the NRLC workshop, and the outline is in print for your convenience here as well as online, where you can access all these links that are live on the paper. This is our PowerPoint, which I was not prepared technology-wise to even have up here, but Dustin is a miracle worker with cables and switches and things, so he got it up here on the screen. So we're going to go through some of the slides today. Oh, there he is. Thank you, Dustin. Okay, so I just want to go over what we're going to discuss today. I'm going to hopefully just talk for 45 minutes and then allow 15 minutes for questions, because it is a complicated issue in some ways. I mean, it's very simple. Life is sacred, created in the image of our Creator, and to be protected and defended at all costs. It's pretty simple. It is a baby in this world of lies, It is a baby. But it somehow gets so convoluted that it takes a little bit of explanation. So I'm going to give a brief introduction, talk about some state and federal activities in terms of Jewish abortion arguments pushing for unlimited abortion or reversing bans on abortion. The history of Jewish abortion advocacy, this just didn't appear today or in the past year since Dobbs' decision. I'm going to try to correct the religious distortions used to justify Jewish pro-abortion arguments. In Jewish law, there's minority and majority opinions and how these are cherry-picked to suit the arguments that we're hearing now. Talk about real and fake rabbis. I want to try to correct the cultural and scientific lies used to justify Jewish pro-abortion arguments and then close. And I hope you do have questions. You might want to make a few notes. On the back page of the outline is blank, so you can write some notes if you want to do that. And the reference guides are PowerPoint, and then also I have an info card. You can access that on our website. As I mentioned in the bio, I grew up in a typical Jewish suburban family home. My father was a religious, observant Jewish man. My mother was not so much. And we didn't talk a lot about social issues at home. The parents worked hard, saved, and the children were expected to study hard, work hard, go to college, get educated, have a nice Jewish family, and please my parents. Like, that's what we were supposed to do. And I was very unaware of social issues growing up. I came of age in the 70s. I went to college in the 70s, and because I was a withdrawn young adult, I didn't date. I just saw the young gals at the University of Pittsburgh making like a revolving door between the health office at Pitt and the abortion clinic. That seemed to be what was happening there, and I did not have an opinion about it. So as the bio said, I woke up eventually, and I was appalled that the Jewish community had become so outspoken in terms of abortion advocacy. My mother told me, I had like a 10-minute talk on how people made babies, and then a 5-minute talk on what Jews thought about abortion. That was like it. And she said, it's acceptable in Judaism until the baby starts to be born. And that was all I learned, and that's all I knew. And I wasn't very curious at that time. But when I did wake up eventually, and I realized that Before Judaism, it was all about these pagan cultures that normalized child sacrifice, had no regard for human life, sacrificed children to the gods of whatever, and then the Lord gave us the Torah and Mount Sinai and said, I don't want you to live that way, right? I want you to be different from the people of the world, and I want you to bring this moral code to the rest of humanity. And that's what we were supposed to do. And all of a sudden, I woke up in 2000 and whatever, and I realized that we're back to advocating for child sacrifice again. That was like really strange to me, and I didn't agree with it. So I wanted to try to talk about that to anyone that would listen. And along the way, I had preconceptions. I thought, well, secular Jews would be for abortion because they're not very religious and they wouldn't know the foundations of our faith, whereas more religious Jews would do all they could to protect their children. And that is basically so, but because of what happened during the dispersion of Jews during the exiles, in biblical history, we became assimilated and acculturated to pagan cultures around us. And this has just been a theme so that even more Orthodox or religious Jewish people now have become used to the idea of abortion for more than just what Judaism allows, which is a very rare exception when the mother's life is imminently threatened. If you listen to or read the media today, you will think that Judaism is a child-killing religion, because that's all you hear, and there's very little opposition to it. And it is a wonder, right, that a people like Jewish people that have been the target of genocide in many generations have now decided that it's okay to kill their own children and help you kill your children. In Yiddish, there's a word, shanda, shame. It's a shame that this has happened, right? There's enough anti-Semitism in the world, and we don't need Jews going around saying, we're going to help you kill your children. We're going to work with Planned Parenthood and the National Abortion Federation. We're going to create funds for you. We're going to pay for your tourism abortions. I mean, it is just heartbreaking and so very dangerous. Even people of goodwill can't help having negative feelings towards this kind of messaging. And that's another reason why I'm so grateful to be here today, to just, if nothing else, to give people an example of a Jewish person that's not like that. That's, with you all the way. I just want to go through a few state activities, and this is on your outline. So there's a couple of themes that I've recognized as I've studied this, that Jewish abortion advocates use several different arguments. One is the free exercise clause of religion, or the establishment clause. Abortion is a religious right and a Jewish value. So don't step on my religious observance by saying I can't have an abortion. Okay? I've heard rabbis say that they maintain their rabbinical authority to authorize an abortion, and they don't want an attorney general in a state to say they can't do that. That's what we're dealing with in our organizations. Or the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that conservatives were so glad to pass in state and federal levels, that say that religious freedom is paramount, and so they're using that law to say that I have a right to choose if I'm going to have an abortion or not, because it's a religious observance. In Wyoming, they've used this argument about the Obama health care. People were concerned that because Obamacare was a federal-funded insurance, that the federal government could tell you what health care you could get and what health care you couldn't get. So now in Wyoming, a judge she stayed the abortion ban there because under this law, she said, no, the state can't say what kind of care you can or cannot get. We protected that when we passed this protection from this Obamacare law. And then they used Jewish religious texts to justify their argument. The Jewish people are not the only ones that are doing this. It's also Unitarians, Church of Christ, even Catholics, Episcopalians, Muslims, and lastly, the Satanic Temple are using these kinds of arguments, bodily autonomy or religious rights, to oppose abortion bans, either asking for exemptions from state bans or trying to overturn abortion limits altogether. And it's a growing problem after the Dobbs decision, after Roe was reversed, because the other arguments are failing. We know it's a baby. The generations now have been raised with the ultrasound pictures, so you can't say it's not a baby anymore. That doesn't work. So they're going to these more esoteric, legal arguments to try to convince people of rights that actually do not exist. So in Missouri, there's a Jewish Community Relations Council of St. Louis, and the rabbis there have said that, again, Judaism demands of me, my first priority must be the living, breathing, fully formed person sitting in front of me, and that I'm here today because none of our religious views on abortion or anything else should be enshrined into our law. I always think about when Jewish people say that they have a right to kill their children as a religious act, I think of the honor killings in Islam and how if you're in America, you can't just go kill your daughter because somebody accused her of adultery or whatever, because that's actually murdering somebody. And in America, under our law system, that's illegal. I try to explain this to people. And then in Indiana, there's a Hoosier Jews for Choice that teamed up with Planned Parenthood. They talk about how, again, it's a religious right and that, oh my goodness gracious, it's a health care issue as well. And because Judaism has a very strict prohibition against child killing, and we'll go into that with some of the PowerPoints, our one exception to that is if the mother's life is imminently threatened. So they say that to save a mother's life, you can't ban all these other abortions because, you know, it's very rare that a pregnancy threatens a woman's physical life now. And so you need doctors that'll cover for you. But there's a medical record. If you have a hangnail or a mild case of depression, that is not going to legally allow you to have an abortion based on a physical imminent threat to your life. But that's what they want. It's similar to what I heard this morning about the euthanasia, where if you have a doctor that can pronounce you dead before you're dead, then they can take your organ. Well, this is like if a doctor pronounces you physically threatened by your pregnancy, whether or not it's right, then you can get your abortion. So they want to make sure that the definition of that is vague, right, so that they can utilize that argument. In Florida, there's a rabbi who's a former Democratic Florida state legislator, and he's saying the First Amendment, which is the first one that they enacted, upon which all of the freedoms are based, was designed to prevent the exact type of thing that we see now, the merger of a radical fundamentalist type of Christianity and the state. This law, this 15-week ban, criminalizes the practice of Judaism. I'm going to get into fake and real rabbis eventually, but my perspective is whenever you see a Jewish person, rabbi or not, standing up in public saying these kinds of things, is they know nothing about Judaism. The Old Testament is the foundation of the pro-life movement, which is why I call it the original pro-life religion. From it stems the New Testament basis for the pro-life movement. And just because Jewish people have forgotten it or haven't learned it doesn't mean it's not true. So a lot of these people that stand out in public just do not know our religion. And then in Tennessee, Wyoming, Kentucky, Montana, you can read all of this. I was just asked to do an interview over the phone the other day about this growing problem. Moving on to 3, history and causes of Jewish abortion advocacy. Now, Jewish law is different than like canon law in Catholicism or English common law. There's not a one-person authority, and Jewish law has developed over centuries. There's a normative, agreed-upon structure and criminal code that prohibits abortion, but there's many minority opinions. So I liken it to a court where you have judges and you always have a majority opinion and a minority opinion. It's very easy to pick a minority opinion to justify your position when it's not actually normative law. And if this goes on for decades and decades and decades, people don't know the difference. Jewish leadership used to be among certain rabbis that were very well educated and dedicated to Torah principles, beginning with the sanctification of human life. But as the rabbinical authority has changed to academic or secular or even progressivism, the rabbis have gone that way too. What they're teaching is not accurate. Then I mentioned aggressive pro-abortion propaganda is unopposed by rabbis who would, in their heart, not agree with these things, but they're afraid of being attacked by a government that's pro-abortion. So if a rabbi might feel that he's endangering his community if he comes out as pro-life, so he doesn't talk about it. They're undereducated. Our yeshiva universities and our seminaries that educate rabbis who are our leaders, right? They have very narrow curriculum when it comes to this subject. I've talked to many different rabbis about the need for enhanced curriculum and education for our rabbis. Because Jews have been the targets of so much anti-Semitism, pogroms, and things in Europe, a lot of them gave up their religion, turned to communism, or just gave up their faith entirely for safety's sake, and then they forgot their religion, and then they came over here, for example. They emigrated to America, and they filled up a vacuum that was created during the Holocaust when so many of our righteous leaders were lost. And they gained a traction here and a foothold here. So somehow or another, choose life in our Deuteronomy has become the right to choose. Right? And then we have these very aggressive pro-abortion groups in Judaism, especially the National Council of Jewish Women. For 125 years, they have been messaging that abortion is approved and permissible or even demanded in Judaism. And so this has now infiltrated most areas of Jewish culture in most communities. I just want to talk a little bit now about correcting the religious distortions used to justify Jewish pro-abortion arguments. I have 4 examples here, which are on the paper here, and then I'm going to pull up some of our PowerPoint slides to show you these. So the first one is that we have this book called the Mishnah, which is basically a compilation of different rabbinical opinions over many, many years. And these minority opinions in the Mishnah are used a lot by these Jewish abortion advocates when they go into legislative debate and try to convince people that their arguments are sound. And it's easy to become confused when you listen to this stuff, because you know intrinsically, like intuitively, that this doesn't make any sense. But they say it so often that you end up believing it and not knowing how to argue against it. So the first one is, the minority opinion is that life begins when a baby takes its first breath, not when it's conceived. And if medical issues arise during pregnancy, the pregnant person's life comes before the life of the child. Another one is when 2 people are fighting and one accidentally pushes someone who is pregnant, causing a miscarriage. And then the text outlines the consequences. If only a miscarriage happens, the harm doer is obligated to pay financial damages, but if the pregnant person dies, then it's treated as manslaughter. And this means that the fetus or the baby is regarded as a potential life because there wasn't a life for a life rather than an actual life, like if the mother dies. So this is a complete mistranslation of the text, which I will go into in another minute. And then the Talmud, which is another area of Jewish opinion and law, says that for the first 40 days of pregnancy, a fetus is merely water. This is back in the day when there was no understanding of what actually scientifically happens in the womb. And there are actual references in our traditional literature that contradict this. But this is often used to justify abortion before the 40th day. And then about ensoulment, because under Jewish law, a soul does not enter the body until birth. The choice to have an abortion is open to interpretation. Again, this whole ensoulment issue is really a distraction from our basic prohibition against killing children in the womb. And now I'm going to go through a little bit of this PowerPoint here. You can look at all this at home, but we have 112 slides in this PowerPoint, and we're not going to go through all this. So this is the basis of that abortion is prohibited in Judaism. This is the Talmud. It says that a fetus is included in the Noahide prohibition of bloodshed that is learned from Genesis 9:6-7 that states, and this is the original translation from the original text, "He who spills the blood of man within man shall have his blood spilt. For in the image of God made he man, and you be fruitful and multiply, swarm in the earth, and multiply therein." And the Talmud interprets the blood of man within man as to include an unborn child in the womb of the mother. Things that are prohibited under the Noahide laws are also prohibited to Jews. The severity of abortion in Torah is underscored by consequences for the abortionist ranging from death at the hands of heaven to the death penalty in a court of law. So this is the original authentic Jewish position on abortion. I believe that in the Noahide Code it says, you should not murder, and then that gets generalized into the 10 Commandments, which you should not murder. But I believe that this was put in there because of the egregious sin of child sacrifice. And the Lord wanted humans to stop that immediately. And that's why this was put in so early in the Bible. Many people translate this as, "He who spills the blood of man by man shall have his blood spilled." Okay, it means, don't kill other people. But this actually says the blood of man within man, which says do not kill the unborn child. And it's reflected in Rachel, who chose life for her second son, Benjamin, rather than say, just dismember this baby and save my life. I mean, she made the right choice. And then we have a rabbi known as Maimonides, who I consider to be one of the first pro-life rabbis, who was very influential in the teaching of Jewish people during the 11th, 12th century, when our assimilation was causing a lot of people to, at that time, lose a sense of what Judaism was all about. And he said the definition of murder, according to the Noahide laws, includes a person who kills even one unborn in the womb of its mother, and adds that such a person is liable for the death penalty. So when pro-abortion Jews cite the Mishnah or the Talmud with some minority opinion, they conveniently leave out that this was the normative opinion for a really long time. And then our Torah has all these foundational verses in this, right? So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of man he created them. Male and female he created them. Oh, that's pretty relevant today. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. So how can you do that if you're killing your kids? And then, may God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and increase your numbers until you become a community of peoples. Thou shalt not murder in Exodus. And I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day that I have set before thee life and death, the blessing and the curse. Therefore choose life that thou mayest live, thou and thy seed. That's very clear. I have been told by rabbis that that's not what it means. But they get their salary paid by their membership, and their membership wants to hear that. Because there's a lot of post-abortive people sitting in synagogue pews now, and they'd lose their job. Also, most Jewish establishment organizations today are very liberal and get a lot of their funding from liberal Jews. And if you go against that tide, you're canceled. There's a lot more fear of that than of God now, today. And then we have all these prohibitions against child sacrifice in our Bible. I'll just read one of them because of time factor, but then one in Leviticus, and thou shalt not give any of your offspring to pass through for Moloch, neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord. Which to me means that child sacrifice in the modern day time through abortion is so egregious to God. It is such an insult to the Creator. It frightens me and motivates me to come and talk about it over and over and over again. Okay, our prophets. The Lord called me when I was in the womb. Before my birth, he had pronounced my name, Isaiah, and then Jeremiah. Right before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet of nations. Then there's many, many other ones, including the scriptures and the Psalm 139 about, knitting me together in my mother's womb, which is generally cited as another foundational reason why Judaism is pro-life. That's not only recognizing the Creator, right, but actually the work of the Creator, the intelligent design and creativity of God in the womb. There is no arguing that if one is immersed in a God consciousness and understands this on a God level. And then there's Job. Job is so great. Did not he who made me in the womb make them? Did not the same one fashion us in the womb? This is to me akin to the Our Father prayer when we're talking about the whole fabric of human life on the planet, no matter what race, creed, color, or origin that we come from. He made all of us. Right? He made all of us, even the people that are misguided and don't understand these things. And that's a whole nother subject for our search for redemption and forgiveness, for our errors in life and the way we think and the actions that come out of that misunderstanding. Because Judaism is a very pragmatic religion, the prohibition on abortion was not 100%. There was one exception to save the life of the mother. And this is because if a woman had a bunch of children and she died in childbirth, there would be nobody to take care of those children. We didn't have aid-dependent mothers then or social welfare safety nets or all this stuff. It was really hard living back then. I do not even understand how this dismemberment would happen without killing both of them. There was no antibiotics. There was no, modern medical instruments. I doubt it actually happened that often. But the Mishnah, again, explicitly indicates that one may destroy an unborn baby if the continuation of pregnancy will destroy the physical life of the mother. And this exception to the prohibition of shedding innocent blood, as I mentioned, was barbaric and dangerous. Okay, intended to be used only in the case of breech birth back in the day when no medical interventions were known that could save both mother and child. Now, many times pro-abortion Jews will say that Judaism demands that when the mother's life is at risk, you must do an abortion. That is a lie. It's permitted, but it's not demanded. And every pro-life law today has an exception to save the life of the mother. So when abortion advocates say that you can't ban abortion because that means you can't save the life of the mother if there's a medical problem or whatever, that's a lie. That exception to save the life of the mother is a good thing, right? It's a good thing. I am a member of the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs, and they're my go-to people. They treat both mother and child, and I mean, I've learned from them there's very few incidents anymore that you have to even take a child to save the life of the mother. And you don't definitely have to do it by torturing it and murdering it, right? You can take that baby in a humane, loving way and either remove it from the uterus and save it through, life-saving intervention, or dignify it with a dignified burial, and have a mourning process for the family. So there's no reason ever to do this ever again. Many Jewish people pride themselves on being very sophisticated and educated and intelligent and having left the medieval Judaism back in the day. But when it comes to this, they're more than happy to go back to the original medieval opinions about this and the practices. They don't like if you point that out to them, though. They don't like that. And on the other side, the Mishnah, even though it gives this permission, it also says whoever destroys a soul, it's considered as if he destroyed an entire world. So there's all these counterbalances to continue telling people that life is sacred and you can't take it lightly. And then one of the rabbis that I work with shared with me that even the babies in their mother's wombs sang God's praises at the Red Sea. When the Red Sea parted and the Jews escaped bondage of Egypt, even the babies in the womb sang. There was a big, song and dance festival at that point, and even the babies in their mother's wombs sang. That, again, shows that the babies are alive in there, having a life. Okay. Now in Judaism, because it's moved so far from the normative prohibition of killing children, the prohibition against abortion has expanded until now it's, they're on board with this up till birth business. You can kill your child on their birthday. And as I said, Jewish abortion opinions have been influenced by secular cultures, and Torah has been misused to justify unlimited abortion practices. So this was one of our great rabbis, Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik. He talked a lot about this, about how Torah, it can be perverted against what its actual reason for being was and is. And one of the texts that is cited often in these legislative debates is Exodus 21, 22 to 25. It's long used by abortion advocates to reframe abortion as legal in Judaism. This text is not a license to abort an unborn child. Rather, it's a reference to involuntary manslaughter, which is not a capital crime. On the slide now, this is the usual translation of this text. But the next slide is actually the more correct translation. This one reads, if two men are fighting and the baby is born prematurely, this is how the actual translation of this should be, rather than the baby dies. This changes the whole context of this argument. The passage, in my opinion, is to a premature birth. The text actually says that if the child departs, and in Hebrew it's a yasa, the womb, and no other damages ensue from the event. In other words, if because of the struggle a baby is born early but is otherwise fine, then the men may be required to pay damages for their carelessness. But if other damages ensues, i.e. the baby is born with some deformity or born dead, then the standard penalties will apply: an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life. So when you hear people talk about this stuff, you can know now, or you can refer to the PowerPoint, that they're lying. They might not know they're lying because they've been told this over and over and over again. And it gives them a sense of power, which is false. We have all these other opinions in the Torah, or verses that people use, they distort. So one of them is in Numbers Count the children of Levi according to their father's house, according to their families, count all males from the age of 1 month and upward. So people say, oh, because Judaism doesn't count a baby as alive for the first month, that means it doesn't have any value and you can do an abortion anytime, even up to a month after it's born. But actually, if you have a good education in the Old Testament, you learn that this was a census methodology because viability at that time was a month. It's not a statement of non-personhood for unborn children, children under the age of 1 month, or for females. Okay, it's just a pragmatic method of counting. And then, if you hear Jewish people say that unborn children don't have any rights because they can't inherit, that's wrong. You can read about it here. The 40-day specification, again, that has actually nothing to do with the status of the unborn child in the womb at 40 days. It actually has something to do with if a woman is widowed and she has a child in her womb, it's more about her status than the child's status. It's very complicated. But anyway, then this whole thing about breathing, this is the verse that they use to talk about how the breathing it signifies life at birth. Then God formed a person from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, so he became a living being. All right? This verse describes the origin of the animating force that God inserted into the human species. It does not refer to, nor does it negate the scientific fact that the animating force of each individual begins at conception. And then another rabbi that I talked to says there's a tradition in Judaism that you cannot harm yourself. Jews can't have piercings, tattoos. That means even if you think the baby in the womb is part of a woman and not actually a baby, she should not be able to harm that child under this kind of a law. I'm going to just fast forward here. I'm just going to talk a little bit about fake rabbis and real rabbis. Oh, I love this rabbi. There are 3 stages in a man's life: in the womb, in this world, and in the world to come. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of rabbis that will tell you abortion is okay, and they benefit from that. They disregard the whole basis of our Sabbath rules. You know, on the Sabbath, an observant Jew isn't allowed to turn a light on. But if a baby in the womb is at risk, they can drive across town and save it. That's another thing you'll never hear from pro-abortion advocates. In New York, when the abortion law was passed, there was a Rabbi Soloveitchik said, "We must protest under sacred and noble causes. It bleeds my heart that none of the Jewish organizations in New York protested that abortion law." That was a shame. And I tried in my own little way to correct that by speaking out. There's a lot of rabbis here that I cite in the PowerPoint that you can reference if you're in this kind of debate or want to become educated. This is another rabbi of great importance. His opinion on abortion reflects Jewish law on abortion. And he says not only are Jews prohibited from having an abortion, but they are prohibited from assisting non-Jews from having an abortion too. I agree with that. That's why I'm up here. According to Jewish law, halakha, abortion is prohibited for non-Jews. It's actually a capital crime. And a Jewish doctor may not perform an abortion even if it would result in antipathy towards Jews. That's real. So when you go out of here today, please remember that. I have 1 more minute because I wanted to allow time for questions. Growing up in Judaism, in a Jewish culture, Jews are always really involved with social causes. If you're a disenfranchised person, there's a Jew out there in a Jewish organization that's going to come to your aid, right? Because we were strangers in Egypt, right? And we were told, because we were strangers in Egypt, we need to go around helping people that are disenfranchised, right? They don't include the child in the womb in that, but I'm trying to teach them about including them, right? But we're also told in Judaism, we have a very, strong ethical and moral code in Judaism. If ever you've read Leviticus, you can't do this and you can't do that, and you can't do this and you can't do that. There's a lot of laws about business and fraud, and you shouldn't be involved with any of this stuff. And I realize that this is counter to the way a lot of people and a lot of Jewish people conduct themselves in business and in their personal lives, because it's human nature. Okay, so I just wanted to share a little bit about, this is very important to me. This is one of my favorite slides, 49. Abortion industry practices dramatically contrast with Jewish ethics and moral guidelines in business, cleanliness, sexual propriety, responsibility to protect friends and neighbors from harm, dietary practices, honesty, and women's safety. Judaism prohibits desecrating the human body. That's why we don't embalm, by the way. We don't embalm because of this. But abortion destroys a human body, and the harvesting of baby parts for profit runs contrary to Jewish respect for the dead. Abortion providers have long been exempt from standard medical practices and regulatory oversight, and decades of illegal and unethical practices are finally being uncovered. Abortion providers perpetuate sex crimes by routinely failing to report evidence of sexual assault and sex trafficking. They fail to provide informed consent to patients and fail to counsel patients on alternatives to the abortion procedure or possible immediate and long-term negative consequences of the procedure. Undercover videos show illegal sales of body parts and the extreme violation of basic moral standards regarding dismemberment of born-alive babies. This is very pertinent, I would say, to a Jewish person whose family members may have suffered the medical experimentation in the death camps. We weren't given any pain medication before they started ripping out our organs and doing those horrible medical experiments. And in the women's camps, there were so many experiments done on unborn children and how to do abortions. And it's wicked, the horror stories. I never do understand why Jewish people can be for any of this stuff. In our Exodus, it says, "Keep away from fraud and do not cause the death of an innocent and righteous, for I will not justify the wicked." And I do want to mention about the abortion pill. This is so interesting. The more things change, the more they stay the same. So this abortion pill was first manufactured by a subsidiary of the same German company that made the gas that killed so many people in World War II, right? And then this company gave the patent up to the Population Council in New York City. And then when the Clinton administration came, they authorized it all. And now we know that because of the COVID crisis, the manufactured COVID crisis, most or all of the guidelines and regulations limiting the use of the pill, the abortion pill, have been jettisoned. So now we're having this telemedicine where you can get your abortifacient through the mail. And it's really dangerous because women don't even know how long they're pregnant. It's so terrible. There's many more emergency room visits because of this pill than surgical first trimester abortions. Dr. Mengele went on to become an abortionist because, he knew what to do when it came to that. So when you hear Jewish pro-abortion advocates speaking, you can call them out on this stuff. How can you be for doing these wicked acts when your ancestors were targets of this? I mean, that's perfectly legitimate to say to people. I have a lot of stuff in here. You can look at this. A lot of stuff about Margaret Sanger and how she put her first birth control clinics in immigrant neighborhoods, right, where there were Jews, Italians, and then her whole idea about racial cleansing through eugenics. And she's a real heroine of many Jewish progressives. If you want to get a Jewish speaker to talk to your group, we have those available. That's one thing. And I want to share about our healing, because the Jewish Pro-Life Foundation, when I started it, I wanted to provide much needed Jewish education to the pro-life community. I wanted to provide Jewish-friendly pregnancy care and adoption referrals, and I wanted to provide a Jewish healing experience for Jewish women and men who suffer after abortion. Because you can imagine you have all these Jewish post-abortive women driving this propaganda craziness to try to feel better or somehow allay their guilt. They need a lot of healing. And a Jewish woman who has an abortion who feels bad really has nowhere to go. Her rabbis told her it's okay. The ladies in her temple have taught her to have the abortion. She just can't really share her grief. So we do have a healing program based on our Exodus verse of the 13 attributes of mercy. Adonai, Adonai, God, compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abundant in kindness and truth, who preserves kindness for 1,000 generations, who forgives iniquity, sin, and error, and who cleanses. So we base our healing program on that, and the concept of teshuvah in Judaism, which is a redemptive experience through understanding and feeling the sin, and then having a transformative experience to want to correct that through acts of good deeds and self-sacrifice. We are having some beautiful healing experiences through our work. So I wanted to make sure I shared that. This is also something that always drives me in Proverbs. A lot of abortion advocates talk about how people are going to die if you don't have abortion care. Unlimited access to abortion care, or people are going to die. And they don't talk about the baby dying, or the women being harmed, or the communities being destroyed. But I always default to Proverbs rescue those being led away to death, hold back those staggering towards slaughter. If you say, but we knew nothing about this, does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who guards your life know it? Will he not repay everyone for what they have done? And then I add, for what they have not done. Yes, and these two last ones. Elie Wiesel was a concentration camp survivor. He was actually not educated on the abortion issue. But I quote him anyway, often. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. So we have to speak up. We have to do what we can. Personally, there are so few Jewish people that speak up about this that I've kind of just come to the position that I don't really care what people think of me anymore. And what's happened is I started the Jewish Pro-Life Foundation also because I wanted to build a Jewish pro-life rabbinistry, a fellowship of people. And it's growing, and we have so many wonderful people working with us now. And then Rabbi Sachs, who I have to quote, we've had some wonderful rabbis. He passed away. He was the chief rabbi of England. This just about sums it up. I'm going to try not to cry. To be a Jew is to be willing to challenge the prevailing consensus. Power allows us to rule over others without their consent. As the Greek historian Thucydides put it, the strong do what they wish and the weak suffer what they must. Judaism is a sustained critique of power. That is the conclusion I've reached after a lifetime of studying our sacred texts. It is about how a nation can be formed on the basis of shared commitment and collective responsibility. It is about how to construct a society that honors the human person as the image and likeness of God. It is about a vision, never fully realized but never abandoned, of a world based on justice and compassion in which they will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Isaiah 11:9. So in closing, I would just like to share that we do have that speakers list, and it's important to maintain a loving and forgiving attitude towards those that do not understand. Please follow us on social media, subscribe to our email newsletter, and if you'd like to be a guest on our podcast, let me know. I'll put you on the show. Thank you for being here and listening, and please ask some questions.